Hello, good morning, everyone. Very big welcome to our event today. Very nice Saturday morning that we have here, actually. It's been raining the past few days, but I think today has been very great weather so far this morning. So, yeah, welcome everyone to our event today, March 20. We have a very exciting event with us today. We have Prasad, who's going to be speaking with us on his expertise in regards for collaboration, between people, different people, in your companies, and from his experience from Google. So really excited to hear, more from him later. But just to share with you guys, in regards to the news that we have so far. Okay, so let me bring in Jia Sing, who's going to be introducing on more on dev space, who's also hosting the event for us today.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on a Saturday morning. And yeah, I think it's awesome that we have this series for the part. I think this is the third one, and many of you have been joining us on Saturday mornings, and this is the third time. And welcome again. And I'm Jia Sing from the Google Developer Relations team. So just to share a bit more about what Google Developer Space is about. So we are home for developers and startups from around the region to learn and connect with one another. And we have a physical space in the Google Singapore office, but due to COVID, we moved everything online. So we regularly host events with developers and startup communities. And this event organized by GDG Singapore, we are really excited for this series as well. And really looking forward to today's session with Prasad Sethi, VP of People Operations at Google. And he'll be sharing with us more about how teams can work together. So if you have any questions that you'd like him to answer, do leave it in the comments and we will get to them later on during the session. Over to you, Wei Yen.
Sorry about that, guys. I was on mute. Thanks, Jia Sing, for the very insightful intro. All right, so just want to show our sense of appreciation for all the groups that have helped us in terms of publicity for this event. Without you guys, we're not able to get the message out there for all of you. And for those who are participating today, definitely you guys would have heard about this event from them. So thank you to all these groups for helping us spread the good word in regards to all the events that we help to host. And as always, we definitely have all these updates on different events that we do. Usually we post a lot of these events on our Facebook group or our page itself. Do check us out on that page, as well as our community pages. Be it that from our community page in Google Dev or on YouTube. So if you want to find out, later I'm going to also talk about the previous talks that we had, so you can actually check out our YouTube channel in regards to the previous events, where we had different leaders, talk about their own experiences. All right, and back to you, Jia Sing.
Yep, and similarly, do follow Google Developer Space on all our social media channels as well, on our website, and we are also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube if you are tuning in from there.
Okay, so a very big hello to all of you that are viewing directly from Developer Space YouTube channel, as well as for GDG Philippines. Big welcome to you guys. Some of you might be here for the first time today, but I think probably you'll also see a few repeated viewers, here and then. Make sure you say hi in the comments. Don't be shy. We won't bite. And definitely, as Jia Sing mentioned earlier on, do ask any of your questions that you have in the comments. We'll definitely try to surface them up as we can later, during the Q&A session. Okay, so just to give a bit of a preview of a few events that we have in the works for the next probably a few months ahead. One very exciting one that we have coming up. Essentially, the title is a little bit of a pun because it's we have a few construction architects. We're really not joking. These people are really they are trained in those fields, but they got changed into software architects related occupations. One of them being a product manager, the other one being a software engineer. So we have two of them, Eunice Chua and Akshata Mohanty. So both of them are from different companies, Harbour and Vicky. And we'll look forward to talk to them, get to know about their experiences, how they moved from another sector into the tech sector, which this is going to happen on the 3rd of April, so that's around like 2 weeks away. So definitely watch out for our updates on that. And not just so that's part of the event for IWD that's related. But after that, we have another event, similar to today's flow, more in related to leadership as well as to personal progression. So for some of you who have been with us since the start, you might be familiar with Bruce Wang. So he's the director of engineering at Netflix, and he has actually given a talk in regards to his engineering and leadership experiences before. And this time around, he's going to be, talking about something else that is kind of not the same as, what he had discussed before, but something that's more related to things that we are, most of us engineers are, kind of worried about on a day-to-day basis. So this is a very exciting event that I would definitely very much recommend you guys to watch. Okay, scaling your own career. How do you think about it in the next few years? And we have another event that we're still in discussions with the speaker and trying to get the topics in and stuff. But definitely watch out for this, another very exciting event. I know some of y'all would have been on Disney Plus, and it came to Singapore and stuff. Definitely some of y'all would have watched WandaVision, and I think the new one that came in was that Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That one, episode 1 is really good. No spoilers, but it's really good. But yeah, we have another engineering leader from same companies who's going to be speaking with us in regards to our experiences. So definitely look out for that. And as mentioned just now, we have our YouTube channel. So if you had missed, one of our previous events, do check those out. And you can actually see the entire talk as well as the Q&A that occurred before. So we had this event around a few weeks ago to a month ago by Chris Hack, who's the Vice President of Engineering in Salesforce, and his talk on managing high and low performers. So that was a really, really insightful talk that he gave in terms of, as a leader, how do you manage the people in your team? Okay, so definitely, if you haven't watched that, do look out for that. Oh, someone is asking about whether I have new glasses. Yes, I have new glasses. My last one broke actually, so I wasn't wearing glasses for quite a few live streams. But thanks for noticing. Oh yeah, okay. So we're always looking for speakers for events, and this includes the events that like the one that we are organizing right now. But not just that, for our sister group at GDG Cloud Singapore, if you have a topic that you are very enthusiastic about, you have worked on it in your own workplace, you want to share this knowledge with the community at large, do write into us. We are definitely anticipating your entries in. We definitely want to put you on the stage, put the spotlight on you as well. So if you have something, don't hesitate, check out that link, bit.ly GDG SGCFP, and let us know what you want to talk about, and we'll get back to you at the soonest. Okay, I'm going to leave there for a few more seconds. Okay, and as always, we always have amazing sponsors who help us out with our events. To in this case, our event sponsor today, Harbor, allowing us to be able to collaborate in much more closer fashion so that we can get things done and also bring this event better to you guys. Okay, so thanks for Harbor for sponsoring us today. Okay, so without further ado, let me bring in our two hosts for today. So Jia Xing is already in, so she's one of our hosts, as well as Julius, who's going to be hosting the event. Okay, and yeah, so on to you, Julius. Can you introduce to us regarding our speaker today?
Yeah, super cool. Thank you, Ian. So yeah, let's go for the introduction. So Prasad leads an organization which generates insights to help Googlers be happy and healthy, enable people decisions at Google to be more data-driven, and tailor rewards and recognition to attract and retain the world's best talent. Prior to joining Google in 2007, Prasad actually is the Vice President of Workforce Analytics at Capital One. And earlier, he was a consultant with McKinsey and Company. He holds an MBA from Wharton School, where he graduated as a Palmer Scholar. He also has a master's degree in chemical engineering. So it's moving from toxic chemicals to toxic people, I suppose, but you don't have all of them at Google. Anyway, And he's from Carnegie Mellon University, and and he has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering as well from IIT Chennai. Prasad, welcome to the event. So good to have you here.
Great. Thank you, Julius. Thank you, Wayan. Thank you, Jiashin, and to the entire developer group community in Singapore, Philippines. It looks like Malaysia as well. So excited to be here. And thank you for taking your Saturday morning to hear about how we can all work better together. So yeah, good to see you all. What Julius and I thought I would do is perhaps take you through a good 20 minutes or so of a presentation, just to sort of whet your appetite on the kinds of things that we have been looking at within Google itself. And we'll specifically focus on a topic that is something that all of us need to be good at, which is to collaborate, to team, to work together better. And so we'll do that, and then of course we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion, which is going to be the most exciting and interesting part of all of this. But Julius, should I just go ahead and get started?
Yes, please do so. Thank you.
Right.
We're gonna go behind now. Bye-bye.
Bye. Great. So as Julius mentioned, I've been at Google for quite a while now. I just finished 5,000 days at Google, so just a couple of weeks back. And so we've just seen a lot of growth within the organization itself. And of course, I joined in 2007, and Google was already a 9-year-old company by then. But in 98, you probably, as part of the developer group, are familiar with these two faces, Larry and Sergey. And this was Google in 98, right? So it is still a fairly young company. It's getting to be a little past 20 years old and so on. But it has grown rapidly. Of course, today, you all know that we have many, many products that each have more than 1 billion users around the world. And we want to continue to innovate. We want to continue to bring new services, new products to our users around the world. We want to integrate across these products better so that everyone has a better experience around them. And we need to be really inclusive. Certainly all of you in Asia Pacific are leading the innovation in many areas as it comes to consumer products and employee products too. And so we certainly want to be working with you, leveraging your expertise and seeing all the innovation that comes from any part of the world so that we reach users all around. So that means that we need to have a really large, big, diverse organization where people have all kinds of expertise. And over the last 13 plus years, I've been part of people operations at Google, which is our fancy term for the human resources function. And we've been thinking about many, many different things around how do we hire people, how do we help them learn and grow, and how do we help them innovate, and what is the kind of culture that we should have within our own work environment, and so on. So we've grown from just Larry and Sergey in 98 to now more than 130,000 employees and dozens of offices all around the world. And all of that, as we continue to grow, we've been thinking about lots of very interesting people and organizational related questions. And just like every other part of Google, we wanted to make sure that we make these decisions about our people and about the organization through data and analytics. As you heard from Julius, I have an engineering background myself. I studied chemical engineering. And when I was in business school, I did not like any of my HR or organizational or people classes at all, right? So it's been quite a surprise, a very pleasant surprise for me myself, that I've spent several years of my professional career in the people space, and I've really come to enjoy it. I do think there is something very uplifting about it, as I'll hopefully be able to share with you over the next hour or so. But my introduction to the space was based on my interest in objective data and analytics. And I thought this is what we needed to do. I joined Google to lead what we call people analytics. And so I thought, in this company where, every search result is based on very complex algorithms trying to find the best information for that particular search query, we should have a similar approach on the people side too. But an early experience at Google, an early project that we did, helped me realize that I needed to think differently about what our objective should be in the people space. And in order to share that with you, I have to transport you to this wonderful looking hotel. It is the Marriott in Santa Clara, which is a few miles south of Mountain View. And this particular hotel used to be the site of some very important decisions at Google for many, many years. This is the place where we used to make promotion decisions for software engineers many years back. We don't do it anymore out there, but in the past, when we worked on this project, we used to do that. And the reason was we didn't have enough conference rooms at Google, and we would fly in hundreds of our senior most engineers from all around the world to come, and we would give them, we'd get them we'd literally use the hotel rooms as conference rooms, and we would form committees. And these committees would review the promotion packets of people who were being nominated to advance to the next level. And it was a very labor-intensive process. And we thought that with the use of people analytics, perhaps we could make this a much more efficient process. So we said, why don't we look at all the decisions that have been made by these committees, and let us look at making the information as objective as possible and see if we can back solve for good promotion decisions. And you know what? We actually were able to come up with an empirical model. This is what the probability of promotion based on a few different parameters in the nomination packets was turned out to be. Now, it is not a very elegant equation, as you can all see, but it was an empirically well-tested equation. We were able to backtest it and saw that for 30% of promotions with 95% probability and confidence, we would be able to make the same decision as these promotion committees. So we were very excited from the people operations side. We said, perhaps the engineers will reduce their workload by 30% because we'll be able to use this formula, and over time, we'll probably have more and more information that we can incorporate into this formula, and we'll have better decisions, right? And we thought the software engineers who live in a world of algorithms would appreciate this attempt at reducing their workload, and they hated it. They said, when someone goes up for promotion, they really put their heart and soul into their work. And we don't want to go back to that person and say, a black box, a formula basically told us whether we should promote you or not. These are such important decisions that we need to stand by them as people rather than just stick it to a formula, right? And that really helped me change my own view about what people analytics should be in people operations, especially for high value decisions. Now, for me, high value decisions are things like whether someone is hired or not, someone is promoted or not, so on, right? Like there are many of these kinds of people decisions. Our job was not to replace and substitute for humans, but instead it is to make these humans much better decision makers, right? How do we showcase for them what information should be used? How do we point out any kind of bias? And how do we assist them in making good decisions? So that is what our focus should be rather than replacing them. And so with that spirit, we sort of, changed our view of what we should be thinking about. And we said, what we want is rather than all people decisions to be automatically made based on data and analytics, we want all people to make decisions based on data and analytics and without bias, right? That is really the focus of our effort. So with that in mind, let me just walk you through the example of how we can all be better collaborators and better team players. If you think about the employee life cycle of any person who joins Google all the way as a noogler, that is what we call new Googlers, all the way to their retirement. There are so many things that you can see in the circle that we need to be able to do. We need to think about how we interview better. We need to think about promotion decisions, as we talked about. But we also need to think about how they are managed, how they are onboarded. We need to form communities for them to get together. We need to be able to train them and so on. So there's just a number of HR-related programs, decisions, and so on that we need to be able to do. So what is our approach in people analytics to help with this? What I think of as the objective of people analytics with the view of helping humans make decisions, but it's all about managing to this quadruple aim, right? That any people, policy, program, or process should always be solving for these four variables. We should be thinking about them. We should be thinking about, is it an efficient process? Take hiring, for example, right? And think about like each of these. Is the hiring process, the number of interviews, the number of phone screens, the cases that you have to solve, is that an efficient process? So that is like one variable to think about. Is it an effective process? In other words, all the things that you put through in hiring, is it actually leading you to be able to differentiate between those who will perform well versus those that don't? Then you need to think about the experience for either the candidate or the employee. Do they like it being part of that particular process? Now, if it is an inefficient process, especially, or like it's a very lengthy process, you might imagine that people are not going to enjoy it as much. And then the last thing, we all need to think about diversity and equity and inclusion. We need to make sure that whatever people policies and processes and decisions we make, that it works for people of all demographics across the world, right, without any kind of bias. So you need to think about all of these factors as you think through people analytics. So we use this framework to sort of work through how we should collaborate. Because what we wanted to understand was, as Google kept growing bigger and bigger, each of our products required larger and larger teams to work on them. In some cases, these were homogeneous teams, right? You'd have, of course, groups of software engineers that have to come together to solve a particular problem. But then you need software engineers to work with UX researchers. You have to work with product managers. You need to work with your marketing and public relations team, and sometimes your HR or legal teams too. So you need to work across multiple disciplines as well. And these teams were in some cases very homogeneous in their demographic makeup, and in other cases they were not. Some teams were large, some teams were not. Some teams were distributed across multiple locations, and other teams were not. So we wanted to understand, is there a recipe for what makes for a good team at Google? And broadly, what we were trying to think about, we actually captured more than 400 variables. We followed almost 200 teams, both in software engineering as well as on the sales side, for 18 months. We had these hundreds of variables that were about the individual compositions of the team and other things that we could follow them on. And we were looking to see broadly if it was the composition of the team that mattered, or if it is the way that the teams work together that mattered. So these hundreds of variables that we looked at could either be classified under team composition, for example, size, demographic makeup, skills makeup, etc., or how the teams work together. How did they resolve conflict? How did they get together to set goals? How did they distribute work? And so on. All of that is about how the teams work together, independent of their composition. And given the interest of time, I want us to get to the punchline right away. And here, in a nutshell, is what we found after we followed all of these hundreds of teams with hundreds of variables over a period of 18 months. In essence, we found that who is on the team matters much less than how the team works together. Initially, we didn't know what to make out of it, but we actually later came to the conclusion that this was very empowering. It meant that every team at Google had the opportunity to succeed and to work well together if only they followed certain norms and methods and used certain practices on how they came together. And that is very uplifting. And that said that, it doesn't mean, I want to be very careful about one point. It doesn't mean that who is on the team doesn't matter at all. What it meant was that in the Google context, that particular element was not contributing to any more variance in how teams were succeeding or not. In other words, people were making the right decisions about who should be on a team already. It might not be the case in many other organizations and other formats. So I'm not ruling out that who doesn't matter. But what this suggests is that in general, at a place like Google, that kind of determination is working well enough that the extra attention that we should be paying is really on how the team should work together. Well, what exactly does it mean for teams to work well together? These were the 5 areas that we were able to isolate and identify as the kinds of things that a team should focus on. So I'm going to quickly breeze through this, and we can come back to it during Q&A as well. But if you start all the way at the top, and if you want to think about what all leads to how teams need to work together, impact is really about whether team members feel that their work matters to the organization, right? No one wants to work on a project that is frankly someone's pet project or frankly isn't going to result in useful impact for the organization or for the world, right? And so that is something that, of course, everyone needs to be thinking through. A second related topic is around meaning. Meaning is much more personal in the way that we identified it. It was about whether you as an individual find that particular work that the team is doing to be fulfilling, that it's meeting some need for you. Impact and meaning were highly correlated, but not necessarily the same thing. So let me just illustrate with an example. Let's say we have a software engineer who's been working on the search team at Google for many years. And she's been working there for, let's say, a decade or so. And there is no doubt in my mind that Google search is one of the most impactful products out there, right? But for this particular software engineer, after she's spent 10 years there, maybe she's passed the learning curve. She's interested in something new. Maybe she wants to go work on Google Photos or on the cloud team, right? And so while the impact is high, on the meaning quotient, it is much lower for her as she searches for something new. So that is what I mean by impact and meaning can be correlated, but they also could mean very different things. So that is what you need to be able to do. The next set of things, I want to talk about the next pair as well. Structure and clarity on the one hand and dependability on the other. Now, structure and clarity is really about who does what in the team, as well as like what is the team's overall goals and how we're going to be coming together and so on. All the formal kinds of interaction methodologies you can think about, right? Like, can we define them? Really, really important. Dependability is much more, again, of a personal notion, which is, do you feel that you can depend on your team members, right? And here's the interesting relationship that we saw. We saw that for new teams or for people who haven't worked together in the past, when they really didn't know about high levels of dependability, whether they could trust their team members, at that point, they wanted really lots of structure and clarity. But once they built up the dependability, they actually wanted to reduce the structure and clarity because that gives you more autonomy and much more freedom to do things better. So it has this interesting relationship where structure and clarity and dependability are almost anti-correlated, I guess, negatively correlated in that sense. And so something interesting to think through. Now, the last element out here, psychological safety, this is the foundational one. This is the one that we found to be most important. And it's a very clinically sounding term, but there's a lot of IO psychology research that's been done about this. One of the most eminent scholars in this space, especially over the last 20 years, has been Amy Edmondson out of Harvard Business School. And it's really, as she defines it, a sense of confidence that when you speak up, that your team will not embarrass, reject, or punish you. And you can imagine how important that is for every one of us in our interactions, right? Do we feel that we are able to share our thoughts? Are we able to share our grievances? Are we able to share our uncertainties about the direction the team is taking? Or do we feel that that is not going to be received well either by the remaining team members or the team leader, and therefore we'll have to do it separately? What happens is that if you have low psychological safety, there is huge significant consequences to that. We're able to truly quantify it when we looked at the sales teams that I mentioned we were following. All else being equal, we found that psychologically safe teams, those that were high on that, outperformed on the revenue targets by almost 20%, while psychologically unsafe teams underperformed almost to the same extent, right? This is hugely important for every organization, for every team to be able to manage through. Now, I want to go back to this pyramid because as a team leader, what can you do about it? One of the things that team leaders can see very clearly is impact as well as structure and clarity, because those are very formally stated, and that is what you're trying to motivate your teams through. But meaning, dependability, and psychological safety are not visible on the surface, right? They're not visible. You have to truly dig in deep, and you have to ask people in order to understand whether that is working or not. Now, funnily enough, psychological safety, as you can imagine by the definition itself, will teams be able to speak up when there is low psychological safety, or will they shy away from even sharing that psychological safety is not high enough, right? And it is possible in some cases that when psychological safety is low, people don't even want to speak up about that, right? And so what you need to be able to do, and this is how we've been able to introduce these concepts and make them real at Google. First is by introducing this language. Psychological safety is now terminology that every Googler can relate to. And just having that language allows them to speak up about certain things that perhaps in the past they didn't know how to express. But on top of that, we put in lots of formal mechanisms to help give them resources so that every team can do better. One is based on the pyramid model that I shared with you. We have designed a diagnostic survey instrument that any team can deploy at any time during their operations together to see how each team member feels about those dimensions. They are done on a completely confidential basis so that no one knows the identity of the people that are involved. That is one way that you can hopefully mitigate any concerns that people might have on psychological safety. Second, everyone on the team gets access to it, not just the team leader. So that way there is transparency, which should also help. Third, we encourage people to have like a very open and robust discussion around it. For teams that are truly struggling with difficult things like psychological safety, we have coaches too, who can come in and as a third party, facilitate these conversations better. And then finally, we look at what actions can be taken in order to improve things. And then, of course, the teams can engage in another implementation of the survey instrument a few weeks or a few months later to think about whether they can do better or not, right? And whether they have been doing better or not. So this is the way in which the team's research that we did is actually being operationalized. So for example, here is what someone's report might look like for their team that they're a part of. One of the things that you might be wondering is, how do you work on something so complex as psychological safety? What can you actually do? And there are lots of things, and again, during the Q&A, if you have more questions about it, we can talk through it. But Amy Edmondson and other researchers have come up with like a wide variety of things that are really helpful. A key role out here is for the leader of the team. They need to be able to demonstrate an ability to learn. So instead of making the team be all about task orientation, if you switch it to having much more of a learning orientation, then that helps. For a team leader to go in every week and say, hey, here's what I tried to do and I failed, and this is what I'm going to do next. That is the kind of role modeling that not only builds psychological safety, but also signals to the rest of the team that that is the kind of expected behavior that you have. Astro Teller, who heads up Google X, well, I guess it's X now, it's part of Alphabet. And he has certainly used one of the methods that I'm sure all of you are very familiar with, which is about conducting pre-mortems. For example, when we were doing the first ever pilot launch of the drone delivery systems as part of X, Astro brought the entire group together 3 months before that and said, imagine that it's the launch date, and we have just tried this launch of Wing, which was what the drone delivery project was called, and it turned out to be a big disaster. What do you think happened, and like how can we prevent that? And that kind of a pre-mortem is another great way of building psychological safety, because when someone is like working, when a team is working really hard, trying to get to the finish line, no one wants to admit like any sense of weakness or that there is going to be some risk associated with the launch, because everyone just wants things to work well, right? Astro is giving them active permission to do the pre-mortem and switch their orientation from what contributes to success. Instead of that, he asked them what contributes to failure, right? And that mindset orientation got everyone in a place where they started identifying risks, and the Wing launch worked really well. But even if it didn't, it would not have been for failure of identifying and fixing many of the risks that were identified as part of the pre-mortem. So that is one of the ways that you can act on psychological safety at scale. One of the things that we then did as a follow-up to that was we used to get lots of questions. Hey, we have Google offices all around the world. Does this team's research apply to people who are distributed across multiple locations? And for all of us, especially as we've been working through COVID and the pandemic and working remotely, as you can imagine, this kind of distributed work has become the norm for all of us. But well before COVID, this was already the case for many thousands of Google employees who used to collaborate with folks across multiple offices. And when we dug into the data, we found that there was really no difference in terms of promotion rates or people's satisfaction or their well-being based on the distribution of offices. But people did find that there were certain things that were not as good as being there live with your teammates. And these irritants were along the dimensions of getting connected, being connected, and feeling connected. These are both technological issues, but also cultural issues. And once we saw that, we found that we needed to provide more guidance for people on how they could work on these three elements, along with each of the team dynamics that I shared with you previously. So what exactly are the kinds of things that you can do? One of the interesting things about the people space is everything seems fairly obvious once you have explained it, right? And you can think of that being the kinds of, on the one hand, that is a kind of simplicity that you desire, right? But one of my realizations over the many years of working in the people space is that it's not about non-obvious answers that need to come in, but instead about choosing among the wide variety of plausible answers. What are the top 3 or 4 that you want to do? And so, for example, here are like some of the kinds of behaviors that would help when you're trying to get connected or be connected or feeling connected, right? So simple things like in terms of getting connected, sharing the time zone burden. Let us make sure that people in headquarters are not always the ones that are getting the advantage, right? That we make it convenient for people in other time zones also occasionally so that we're all sharing in that burden. On being connected, for instance, ensuring that of course, everyone now has great etiquette on how to be part of video conferences. But imagine that, like, in the pre-COVID world, these are the kinds of things that we needed to figure out for different people. How do you ensure that everyone is participating? Ensuring that everyone, regardless of the location that they are dialing in from, is getting enough voice, as well as others are being considerate of their ideas. And the last thing, one of the key things that we found from a very human standpoint is that when you meet people live, when you see them, you're able to see so much more of their body language and are able to check in on them because you're seeing them not just during meetings, etc., but you're just seeing them in the course of the day, right? And so one of the key things that we saw was that it was very important for people to take a moment or two at the beginning of every interaction to check in with each other. And even though it might not seem like the most productive of time, but that sense of connection is important for ensuring that you're able to pick up on cues and body language that you perhaps wouldn't pick up normally as part of video conferencing, etc. So these are like certain things that we were able to point out, and we have playbooks around this that are much more detailed for team leaders, etc. We made them public as well. I'm sure they're available on the Rework site if you folks are interested. I want to like sort of wrap up in like the next few minutes by sharing with you sort of how we think about the people space in general at Google. Broadly, of course, we are interested in teams and their productivity. But what we really wanted to do with the team's research was to say, how can anyone at all always be a better team player, whichever team they're part of, right? That they take these lessons not just for their current team, but for any future team that they're part of too. And that is like an example of the kinds of work that we do within people operations all the time at Google. Because what we are interested in is we hire such amazing people. We want to make sure that we are helping all Googlers achieve their potential. And so just to give you a flavor for how widely and broadly we think about it, here is another long-standing project that we started almost 10 years back. And it is called our GDNA project. And it's a longitudinal study that we hope to run for 100 years, right? Where we are following people through their entire careers to understand what kinds of things happen to you over the course of your career that maximize both happiness at work as well as happiness in life. And so we sign up people. We literally have more than 10,000 Googlers who are part of the study. And many of them continue in it, even if they leave Google and go on to other places, right? And this kind of longitudinal study will hopefully help us as we think about what kinds of work environments we need to ensure they can flourish in, what kinds of things happen in the course of people's lives and their careers, how they've learned, how they've grown, etc. This has come in extra handy over the last year as we've been working through and dealing with COVID all around the world. We've used this particular panel to look into people's productivity, their physical and mental well-being, as well as their sense of connectedness. And what we do with this kind of information is, first and foremost, we give information back to the individuals who are part of the panel themselves, so that they are learning something new about themselves as they go through this, right? And sometimes it might be about psychological traits and behaviors about themselves. Other times it might be, we'll have them journal and we'll say, hey, here's what you told us that you wanted to accomplish 3 years out into the future. Well, we are now 3 years in the future. Let us show you what you wrote and you tell us whether you completed it or not, right? So in this way, it is something that is going to be helpful for people throughout their lives. And the kinds of feedback that we get about this project is just very, very heartwarming. Take the second one, for instance. Someone saw that their grit level was low as part of taking the part in this GDNA panel. And this person took a lot of steps to train more diligently, and they won some kind of a boat race, right? That's the kind of thing that we want to constantly think through. In my view, everyone has incredible potential, right? And it's all about ensuring that they're in the right work environment, that they're surrounded by people who understand them and who are looking to help them succeed, and that you're also giving them all kinds of tools for self-awareness and helping them learn and grow, right? And if you're able to do that, then we can unleash so much more for the entire world, and hopefully we'll be able to delight people all around the world with some amazing products. So that's the kind of thing that really gets me excited about working in the people space, and still using science and data and analytics not to replace people, but to empower people. And so that is what we've been focused on. And we're always trying to live up to this statement, which is, if you give people freedom, they will amaze you. And so with that, we'll turn it over, Julius, to any comments and questions that people might have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prasad, for such an informative presentation. We do have a lot of prepared questions, actually, people who actually signed up for the event and ask questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll go around and try to answer as much as possible. Also, for people who are attending live, please do put in your questions in the live chat below. We'll try our best to accommodate as much questions as we can with the time we have. That said, we'll give the microphone to Chasin to ask the first question.
Thanks a lot, Prasad. I love the last slide. Some questions that Google can't answer. So that's why we're here to ask you. So I guess the first question that we have is that I think you made a conscious decision to name the team People Analytics when you first started. So yeah, maybe to someone who's new to that term, how should they think about People Analytics? And what are some key guiding questions you would use for yourself and the team?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jashin. And it was a very conscious decision indeed. My role was actually called head of HR analytics when I joined. And I was very clear that I didn't want it to be about the HR organization, right? That it really needed to be about the people of Google and how we can help through the use of analytics, how we can help them all. And so that is why we named it People Analytics. I think just like any other kind of technology, this one too has a lot of power, but with that, we need to be able to use it really responsibly. I do think that, just like any other part of really, really powerful information, we need to think about privacy, security, bias, all of those things have the ability to creep in. And so all the things that we do, we're constantly thinking about how is this going to be useful for an end Googler? And we don't want to come across as being big brother and monitoring them and feeling like they don't have any autonomy or voice in like what they do. But instead, it is to make them much more self-aware and amplify their own abilities rather than taking them away.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Prasad. We have another question from someone that we think we have seen recently. So the question is, in engineering, we have telemetry to ensure visibility of system health. Is there something similar as well to measure, I suppose, what Wayne is saying, the health of the organization?
I think it's a great analogy, right? That we should think about a lot of people analytics as telemetry as well. And so there are a number of thoughtful metrics. I think of them along sort of three dimensions for telemetry. One is certainly for the HR departments itself, and they look through the entire employee life cycle. So there's like a hiring process, then there's an onboarding process, there's a learning, compensation, benefits, exit, attrition process, right? So you can have like, a set of metrics that are talking about how well are each of those things working. And the metrics are usually along those 4 E's that I talked about: efficiency, effectiveness, experience, and equity. So that is one set of things. So a very common one, for example, will be, one that every organization will have as part of their people telemetry will be attrition rates. Now, of course, I saw that one of your previous speakers talked about high performers and low performers. As you can imagine, companies want to understand, attrition rate of high performance versus low performance, for instance, right? Like, so that is one set of metrics. Then there's a second set of metrics which are about the health of the organization at any given standpoint. And there you can think of it as around like a few different areas. One is around, is the organization itself efficiently constructed? What are the spans and layers of management layers? What is the distribution by location and all of that, right? Like, do you have the right capabilities, right skill sets, etc. Then you think about information flows. Is everyone working together, collaborating well, and have the right information going through to them? And then the last piece is just like, broadly around the culture. Is this an organization? Is the environment set up for innovation? Is it set up for effectiveness, etc.? And then you have like a layer of thinking about all of these with the lens of diversity, right? You cut it by all of your demographics. So these are the ways in which you can think about constructing the telemetry of organizational health. And many organizations have some systems around it. Obviously, some of them will be visible to the entire company, and other things will be visible just to the leaders of the organization. But I do think this is it's an appropriate analogy.
Yeah, thank you, Prasad. I think also there's a pre-submitted question which ties in closely. The question is around organizational health, right? Do you see certain correlation around that and the exit interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. In general, what we have seen are the kinds of things that people think about when they leave is broadly around career development, right? Like, can their career goals be met in a particular organization? And so you could say like some of that is about like, what is the state of growth of that organization and so on. But a lot of it is about, is the organization constantly moving people around? Does it have a commitment to learning and growth and helping people, putting them in stretch roles and things like that? So that is one. So that is on like, something everyone can do. And then the lack of good organizational health is a big demotivator for people. And so what does bad organizational health look like? It looks like managers who are not supportive, right? Like, weak managers, there's like the age-old adage in the people side, which says that people join good organizations and leave bad managers, right? And so we did like a sister study on how to improve management capabilities within Google. And so we see the power of having like amazing managers around us. Similarly, organizations that are not inclusive, right? It's one thing to hire people who are diverse, but then if they don't feel like they have an opportunity to succeed, and if the organization is not a place that they feel included in, that is absolutely a recipe for exits as well. So definitely we see like quite a bit of impact of organizational health on attrition.
Thank you so much, Prasad.
Prasad, so on the point of hiring and promotion, we have a question. So in Google, software engineers, they are able to nominate themselves for promotion. So yeah, do you see any difference between the self-nomination rates for men and women?
Many years back, we started monitoring this, and we actually did, right? We saw higher self-nomination rates for men compared to women. And so at that time, the head of engineering, Alan Eustace, we worked with him to send out a message to all of the software engineers and said, hey, this is the pattern that we see. And we encourage women too to nominate themselves. Because again, not to stereotype, but in general, what has been found is that for the same set of accomplishments, men will be, much more eager to self-nominate themselves. Whereas, again, I don't want to generalize and stereotype, right? But that is what you've seen in society. And so Alan's message was really about that. Once we sent out that message, Jashin, the next cycle, we saw that the rates had equalized, right? 2 cycles later, that difference again came up. So it suggests that you can't just leave all of these. You have to constantly keep monitoring. And that is why the analogy again of telemetry is so important, right? That there's not something that you feel oh, I took action once and boom, it's gone. Yeah, you have new people coming in and and so on, right? So you have to constantly, some of these things you have to constantly keep reminding. So now what we do is every cycle we remind everyone to just nominate themselves. And so it's just become part of our communications practice.
That's assuring to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I really agree that it can't be a once-off effort. I think it's something that we have to consciously and deliberately keep doing. And
Yes.
On that note, this month is actually a lot of communities, organizations are celebrating International Women's Day.
Yes.
And talking about inclusion and diversity. So we also have another question that is about unconscious bias when hiring. So what are some things that are in place in the team to ensure that, to tackle against unconscious bias?
Yeah, so this again has been such an important area for us, right? For several years now, as part of new hire orientations for everyone who comes into Google, we have a module on unconscious bias. And because we want everyone to be able to understand that all of us are subject to it, right? And part of it is that, as humans, we are all getting so many pieces of information every single day. And bias is our shortcut method as humans of dealing with that very, very quickly. But that shortcut method leads to all kinds of unforeseen errors. And so we need to be conscious of it. And so that's why that kind of training and self-awareness is really, really key. The best way to combat it, in addition to awareness and education, though, is putting in structure. So for us, the main way that we try to address unconscious bias in hiring is by having very specific rubrics about here are all the things that you could be subject to as part of it, and therefore you need to take into account. So for example, whenever we meet people for interviews, there have been some studies that have shown that people make up a decision very, very quickly, right, about the person. And so we tell people about that kind of research, and we'll tell them hey, your focus right now should be on applying a structured set of interview questions to all the candidates that we are hiring, that we are interviewing for that role. And during the interview itself, your focus should be on just taking notes, right? And the evaluation part comes later. In other words, focus on information gathering first and then evaluation later, rather than trying to do evaluation during the time of the interview, right? And so there are lots of putting in structure, decoupling information gathering from evaluation, educating people on the different types of unconscious biases that all of us are subject to. And then the last thing that I would say is what we do, as Jashin, in terms of hiring is we don't let individual hiring managers make the hiring decision. We have hiring committees that are set up. because every one of us will want to hire people just like ourselves. And so that is why we think that committees, now committees are subject to their own biases, right? Like there are groupthink and all of that, but it's one layer removed from the kind of bias that can creep up when individuals are doing it. So at every given point, and this to me is like an important thing, we're constantly trying to, like, one of the important telemetry kinds of signals for us to get better at in all organizations, and even at Google, we continue to like work through this, is trying to measure bias in our systems and as people. It is really, really hard, right? But that is like, has to be the focus, because we need to be able to show that we are fair and equitable in all the people decisions that we're making.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then we also have, we have another question, very scientific day. Do you have any advice in measuring an employee lifetime value? And is it also dependent on the position that they take in the company?
Yeah, this was something that, especially with my MBA background, initially when I was in the people space, I was very enamored by this kind of a concept. Can we actually, in fact, this was one of my first projects at Capital One, to try and see if we could measure an employee lifetime value, and how would that be distinguished based on position and the level they're in, or their performance and so on, right? And it becomes really, really hard to try and quantify it this way. And one of the issues at the end is that people's performance changes over time, the kinds of roles they're in change, and so on, right? And so I would say, like, also, it also in some ways can dehumanize people. In other words, like, you're reducing everyone to like a number, right? And like they have to make so many assumptions around that kind of a number too. So there is something to be said out here, but I do think, like, in general, I've shied away and moved away from this kind of a concept a lot, right? Because I don't know what active practical purpose that you'd have around this. And I think, sometimes people try to use these kinds of things to say, well, can I compute what the cost of attrition is within an organization, etc. And so there might be some limited value in doing things like this, but in general, I worry about things that turn people into numbers.
Yeah, thanks, Prasad. Also, just a follow-up out of curiosity, right? Are there situations whereby, like, the HR team will have to consider the amount of revenue an employee is able to produce to justify, keeping the employee, promoting the employee, or.
Yeah, and so part of it, what happens, Julius, is yes, like, for like a sales team or something like that, these are exactly the kinds of things that are already built into the job description, right? Like, you come in and you have like certain kinds of revenue targets and so on. The question becomes, what do you do with a software engineer or a UX researcher or a people analytics person, right? How are you going to compute that kind of a value? And then, does everyone have equal opportunity? What if you are on like a project that works and someone else is on a project that fails, and so on? So I think it very quickly becomes a hard exercise to do this. And so, of course, you have to make these kinds of decisions. We still have to think about, what are the kinds of people that you want to promote and so on. And I think there's some kind of objective quantifiable information that is going to be useful. Then I also think that you need to sort of get information from your peers and from managers, other people that you're working with, which by nature is going to be soft. And then lastly, I think you're going to still have some judgment that is exercised by the decision makers. And that's only going to pan out over the future, right? So now, for all the objectivity that we have talked about, I'm basically telling you that, like, some of these people decisions fall into the category of being unknowable, right? So here's the I guess the analogy that I would have for you. when it comes to hiring a person, is it closer to, the odds of tossing a coin? Or is it something that can be like, much more deterministic, right? And so that I think I don't think it's like I don't think it's like as bad as tossing a coin. Like I don't think it's like 50-50, but I don't think it is fully deterministic either. And that's where like some judgment is going to come in. And what we want is for people to exercise that judgment in a fair and consistent way and as free of bias as possible.
Thank you so much.
Speaking about promotions, Prasad, we have another question that's a little related to that. So how should one think about staff or job leveling, and what have you found, networks and otherwise?
Oh, it's like such a tough one, right? On the one hand, everyone wants to progress in their careers, right? And so that is why leveling is so important at an individual. Everyone wants to learn, grow, and showcase that there is something meaningful for them to grow toward. So in that sense, but also people have a very, very heightened sense of their own capabilities, right? There have been like quite a few research studies that ask people, so how many of you think that you're in the top 5% of your organization or the top half of your organization? And you can imagine what the results are, right? Like usually you'll find that a quarter of people will say I'm in the top 5% of my organization, and 95% will say I'm in the top half of my organization, right? So we all have a heightened sense of ourselves, just as we should, right? Like we should value ourselves really, really highly. So it becomes really crowded at Capital One, we used to ask people how often they wanted to get promoted, and they would say every 6 months, of course, right? Like, why not? But it would get very crowded in the CEO's office if he kept promoting people every 6 months. So there's going to be a limit. I think there's always going to be. So that's why you want some kind of fairness and equity. Now, at the organizational level, what does leveling do for the organization itself? I think it provides some type of structure for the kinds of capabilities and skills that you want at like to get certain types of work done, right? So you want that structure and you want it to be as fair as possible. So at Capital One, we once we had to do something where as the growth rate of the organization slowed down, when headcount is growing rapidly and when the organization is growing rapidly, you can continue to promote people really rapidly and everyone is happy and the organization is okay too. But when the growth of the organization slowed down, as was the case at Capital One, we literally doubled the number of levels, Dashin, right? So everyone got half the promotion that they would have gotten in the previous system, right? But they still are seeing some growth. They're still seeing some of that. So I would say, it truly depends on the size of the organization. If you think of every layer of the organization as having like, a typical rule of thumb for like span of control is, let's say, 5 to 10 people or like 7 people or so. So you can think of, how many layers in the organization do you need for the headcount that you have, right? And that might help you with the number of levels that you want to set up. It's a really, really hard problem to like satisfy everyone because there's just so much demands on it.
Thank you, Prasad.
Prasad, we have another question from the audience. This one comes from Dane. And the question is there any published data on GDNA?
There are a few things, Dane, that have been useful for us. One of the things that we found, for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. One, we asked people about the imposter syndrome, right? And one of the things that you find in many sort of high achievement organizations is that you have a lot of insecure overachievers in them, right? And we found the same thing at Google too. A third of people at Google were subject to the imposter syndrome, where they felt like, oh my God, I see all kinds of amazing people around me, and do I belong here? And once we were able to publish that internally and talk to people about that, they felt so relieved because they thought they were the only one. And to hear that it was fairly commonplace for many people to feel it at different parts of their tenure at Google was quite a relief. So that is one that came about. A second one that came about was as we thought about well-being, had this notion of people who are integrators, who integrate work and life together. They're working on their project and they're planning their vacation, like everything is blended together for them, versus segmenters, those who have very clear boundaries between work and life. And what we found was that 70% of Googlers were integrators, but segmenters have much better well-being. And a lot more people wanted to be segmenters. And the one natural way that everyone was forced into segmentation is when they became a parent. Once you have a child, you're automatically forced into being much more of a segmenter. But that's a fairly expensive way for everyone to become a segmenter. Hopefully, of course, if it works for you and your family, that's the right decision, go for it. But if your focus was just on segmentation, not necessarily having a baby, there might be other things that you want to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you so much.
Well, that's like really in support of the Singapore government's vision. Yeah, I guess we have a submitted question, which is team bonding activities. So I think you were sharing about how during the pandemic, a lot of people find it really difficult to separate work and life. So yeah, how do you have team bonding activities for your team, and also on psychological safety? I think now that a lot of meetings are done virtually, we don't get to meet up with the team as often as we'd like in person. How do you manage to get team members closer to one another?
Yeah, I would say like we're all learning as we are going around this, especially because everyone is struggling so much, right? I'll give you like three things that sort of we have found so far. One is that when you have these happy hour kind of events, right, they don't seem to be as effective. They soon lose out steam, right? Because it's really hard to do it virtually, and maybe there'll be better technology and so on, but it just doesn't seem to have like the same kind of effect as in real life. Instead, I think it's much more important to take time during your regular meeting interactions for folks to check in with each other a little more and to get much more of a personal life or so on, more of that sharing built into your work meetings itself, right? So that is one thing. Second one is a lot more frequency of interactions and shorter interactions. In the past, if you had like, one weekly staff meeting, which is what I used to have, for example, with my team, I now have 3 shorter meetings spread throughout the week. That kind of constant interaction is better, at least during the period that we are in COVID. That seems to be working out more. And then a lot more attention, especially for new hires as they come into the organization. And so you want to spend a lot more, I think, like especially for team leaders, to focus a lot more on recognition, right? And recognition doesn't always need to mean that you give them like a big performance rating or a bonus or whatever. It can be really about taking out time and calling out what people have done, right? And so all of those make people feel like they care. And especially because isolation has become like such a big issue with COVID. Of course, for many people, their personal situations are such that they're already feeling isolated, not able to meet not just people from work, but also people in their families too, right? And so one of the most surprising things that we found, Jajan, was we thought that our Googlers who were living on their own would be the ones that are feeling most isolated. And certainly, like quite a few of them do. But surprisingly, we found that parents felt really isolated. And because that feeling of isolation is as much emotional as it is about physical. I think like for parents, it actually feels like, okay, the world is on me, right? I don't have, many of them, at least in the US, for example, schools are still closed. They don't have access to childcare. They feel that they're completely alone and trying to do everything on their own. And so that is the feeling of isolation they were experiencing, even if it was not physical isolation. So, really important question. I don't think we have all the answers out here, but I would say, like, as the questioner points out, all of us need to really be thinking about how do we stay together better while we're all dialing in through video all the time.
I think just another follow-up question. So we talked, I think you mentioned about having more frequent meetings and checking in with one another more. So are there any questions that you would ask or things that you would check in with the team when you are having these conversations? Because you're talking about it's more than just like work status updates.
Yeah.
But like what kind of things would you find out from your team members?
Yeah, it is. There are some folks on my team who just constantly seem to have like great questions to ask people, right? Like, so every week we are asking something new and different. You can certainly start off with like things that get everyone to open up, like, what did you do over the weekend or whatever it is, right? But I think you want to like keep doing new things, both to encourage people to speak up, but also to like learn about each other, right, better, because you're trying to connect to them as humans. So there's like questions about what are you hopeful for, or what are you looking forward to, right? Like, there are like certain types of things that get people much more excited about talking, right? Like, what are you grateful for, and what is like one amazing thing that happened to you over the last week, and so on. So I think anything that you feel like is not too personal, that people feel like they are climbing up, but also something that everyone is energized to talk about, is going to be key. And again, I think like in all of these, for the team leader to role model first and to share their views will be a cue that everyone else takes to answer the question, to see if you're being truly genuine about it, or whether you're just like trying to go through the motions, right?
Yeah, I think those questions are definitely much better than the standard, how have you been?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience as well, from Coach Rai. So how do you deal with superstar technical geniuses who have bad interpersonal skills, and people find it difficult working with them? And when do you draw the line between keeping them and letting them go?
This is again such a great question, right? I would say, in the past, a long time back, I would say we probably accommodated more of these kinds of folks at Google, because we are a technical company and we thought that technical brilliance accounted for a lot. But as the organization has gotten bigger and bigger, these kinds of, let's say, technical jerks cause so much damage, right? Like that, even if they are, let's say, 5x, 10x better than someone else, the damage that they can do can be like 100x, because of like all the people that they hurt around them, right? And so at some point, maybe this is where like you should have your employee lifetime value kind of equation to showcase why these kinds of jerks are just not good for the organization. I would say this is like really hard, and especially one of the things that and there are like so many different variations of them, right? The hardest ones for managers to act on are people who manage upward really well, but are really difficult with either their peers or their own subordinates, right? Because sometimes you just don't even have that information as a manager. And that is why it is so important as part of your performance review process or other process to like just get that kind of feedback quickly. And ideally, that kind of feedback is shared with this person and who hopefully is self-aware enough to want to improve. But otherwise, they need to get like a very clear signal that this is not going to be tolerated within the organization. So the sooner that it can be addressed, the better off it is. And in fact, this is something that we are working into our performance management system as we speak. We want the performance management system to be not just about what you accomplished, but how you accomplished it. And so we are being very clear about saying like, here's the what and here's the how, and both of them have real value for the organization.
Thank you. And I think we have a follow-up, a bit related, although this is a pre-submitted one. So we want to also try our best to keep them out the door if possible. So is there a way to, I guess, like using data to predict the likelihood of a good hire?
Before the person enters the recruitment funnel is really, really hard. But this was like the kind of project that Sergey Brin wanted us to work on for many, many years. He said, like, can you have an algorithm that basically, you feed in resumes and it outputs hires. But as you all know, the quality of information that you get with things like that is so poor and it can be easily gamed. This is one of the areas where we work on a lot. There's a lot of research in the selection literature in industrial organizational psychology that we draw upon as well, external research. One, we use 4 particular factors that we can't really identify before the recruitment funnel, but through the recruitment funnel. The most important one, I'll keep the answer short, is what is called general cognitive ability. And it relates to your ability to solve problems in a structured, thoughtful way. It's not about can you develop the most amazing algorithm or build the best spreadsheet, right? It can be that too, but it's really much more broader than that. It's about when you're faced with a problem, are you able to like very quickly dissect what is the root of the problem? Are we asking the right questions? Are we forming the right hypothesis? What is the data that you would collect? What is the structured way you would analyze it? How would you synthesize the information? So that is the kind of problem solving that you're looking for. And so general cognitive ability has been shown in the selection research to apply across multiple industries, multiple geographies. And for a long time at Google, we used your college grades, your GPA, as well as scores on tests like the SAT and so on in different countries as our substitute for GPA, for general cognitive ability. And we found that none of those mattered. And so now we have come up with our own rubrics for thinking about this general cognitive ability. And that is what we test during our interviews in a structured way.
Thanks, Prasad. Back to the point about people who manage upwards well, but maybe not so much towards their peers or those below them. Do you also are there any implementations or form of guards against toxic communication in the organization? I think for us, we also have a 360 review. So people above working alongside and those under you will be able to perform review on you. So are there any other actions or steps that we can take to ensure healthy communication?
Yeah, I think that kind of honest peer-to-peer feedback is like the best one if you can scale that, because everything else is going to sort of on the one hand, you might have some kinds of toxic communication or communication that hurts a set of people or hurts the organization, but on the other hand, you have rights of employees to free speech and so on too. And you want to be really careful about how you safeguard both of those interests and provide the right coaching. So the best thing is going to be peer-to-peer. Anytime if HR or legal steps in, then it's going to compound the problem. Of course, you have to do that occasionally because you just can't have certain types of things, right? Like we have like very clear set of values at Google and so on, right? Like, so if you find people that are violating that, then they absolutely need to be spoken to, if not terminated and so on. But I do think has to be a balancing act. We don't do any kind of at an individual employee level, we don't do things like monitoring sentiment analysis, etc., to automatically target people, because again, there are lots of legal safeguards, etc., for employees too. So we have to be really careful about them.
I think we have also a submitted question, which asks about how to manage your manager. So this person is asking if the manager is not functioning as they should. What's the advice? Should you skip that level and go up to that person's manager?
This relationship that you have with your people manager is perhaps one of the most important, right? And so I do think you want to try and talk to them first if you can, right? And this is not something that I've seen any evidence of, but I firmly believe in Hanlon's razor. Hanlon's razor is a sort of a subset of Occam's razor, which basically is a heuristic that says that what you're typically ascribed to malice is perhaps better explained by ignorance or negligence or so on. So the first attempt, I think, has to be about making the person self-aware. Do you know that your behavior is resulting in this kind of an impact on me or your team and so on? And you have to give them like one chance at that. And if of course they don't see it that way, or if they're not able to react, then absolutely you should talk to their manager or your HR person. And last thing, vote with your feet, right? I do think it's the responsibility for every manager to take care of their teams and to help everyone learn and grow. And if you're not seeing that, then the best career advice that I have, Jashin, in my time has been, if we're all given the choice to work both with people and managers that we admire and can learn and grow from, as well as do the kind of work and projects and be in the domains that we want to, if we can get both, great, right? But if we had to get only one and not the other, I would always choose the people rather than the project.
Oh, that's really great advice.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prasad. In the interest of time, just one final question that we always ask our guests. Do you have any books, research recommendations that you'd like to share with us?
Absolutely. So many amazing things that are coming up in the social sciences. I would say, for all of you, as you grow in your careers and so on, right? As you grow in your careers, the most interesting, important, and challenging problems that you'll face will always be people and organizational problems. They won't be technical or business problems. There'll be people or organizational problems. So for every one of you to think about how do you address those in as fair and consistent a way as possible, as objectively, as free of bias. There's just lots of good work that is done in the social sciences that I would highly recommend. But a couple that I think are really amazing are the Undoing Project, which is a story of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They're basically the founders of behavioral economics, right? And so a lot about unconscious bias and the kinds of cognitive biases that all of us are subject to. It's told in a beautiful story. I'd highly recommend that. Then Judea Pearl, the Book of Why. Judea Pearl is an AI ML researcher, and I think again he asked a lot of really good questions about the limits of what data can tell us and what we as humans need to do. So I would highly recommend that too. And then just to give you something that is completely different, One of the books that I thoroughly enjoyed over the last couple of years is from Harvard biologist named David Reich, who wrote a book called Who We Are and How We Got There. And it's about using historic DNA to trace the movement of different civilizations. And it was just fascinating, right? Like, typically we think about history as having to look for monuments or burial grounds or books and things like that. And he was just able to use historic DNA to see how people have moved around and showcase that most of us are interrelated, more so than we know. So again, it's like a very thoughtful book that I liked a lot. So hopefully that helps. And this was great, Julius, Shashin, and Veyuan. Like, thanks for inviting me, and really glad we were able to have this conversation.
Prasad, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to have you again. It's really insightful. Thank you once again.
Alrighty, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Again, once again, we always invite, at least until the pandemic ends and we can have real virtual events, real live events. We'd be inviting people that we normally find expensive to fly here. So that's the best way to actually get some insights, right, from people from the other side of the world. So that said, thank you once again. And we wanted to share also some very exciting updates. At least we think it is quite exciting set of updates. We've been running Project Rework for some time. And actually, we have been receiving certain emails and comments in GDG Singapore about Rework's, how should I say, initiative on HR, people operations related matter. But also there has been certain requests around whether we expand our coverage to product management, for example, a bit of more on the engineering side of things, which is not purely related to people operations per se. We realized that it is true, right? Like Google's Rework initiative is actually geared towards people operations. So we're hoping to actually expand the initiative to also cover certain areas that has been requested, but we are not able to fulfill. Hence, we're going to just do a bit of a renaming right here. We're going to call it the Big O development. Hope everyone's happy with it. So the idea is pretty much, as you know, for engineers, we know what Big O is about. For non-engineers, we'll read it as Big On. But the whole idea is to actually create, become more and more complex, if I may, and also become more sophisticated in the same way as the Big O notation actually tells us. It's what we use to identify the complexity of an algorithm. So we would like to hopefully become this force of good in this side of the world. And so moving forward, it's the same set of events. We'll do it with Google Developer Space, GDG Philippines, GDG Singapore. And so that said, again, just wanted to remind everyone of the events that are coming soon. It's in 2 weeks' time. We'll be inviting two exciting speakers who will be sharing with us, their experience on moving from being a construction architect to software architects. After that, we'll be bringing in Bruce Wang once again from Netflix. We've heard him few months ago, I guess more than half a year ago. And then we're gonna learn more from him again, engineering career paths. Likewise, we will be having Anastasia from Disney. We are also going to invite more speakers. If you have any suggestions as well, you can drop us a note. We'll try to reach out to them. And of course, if you'd like to speak, we'd be more than happy to have you. Also, this afternoon, there will be a bunch of events, and one of the events that we will be working together with are the Developer Students Club, also sponsored by Google. They'll be having a final pitch this afternoon. We wish everyone the best, especially for the final contenders. It's an event that's happening in different parts of the world, initiative by Developer Student Club. So if you are interested, please join us once again at 2 p.m. later this afternoon. And if you're interested to speak, or you have friends that you think that are, very good speakers that you want them to contribute, and even if you want to speak, don't know how to start, you'd like to learn, we'd be more than happy to help you out. Reach out to us. You can tell us that, okay, you need some mentoring, some coaching. We'll be more than happy to help you. So please reach out to us through the link. And once again, we like subscribers. It makes us happy. So please do subscribe to our channel. Join us in our Facebook community if you haven't done so. Looking forward to see you there. Say hi. Don't be a stranger. And thank you once again. That's Project Rework, and we hope to see you next time. Bye bye.